Morning, everybody, and you're welcome back to, I believe, the third day of corporate governance, ESG, sustainability. And before I get into the last three segments I promised to speak about, I just thought I'd do a quick recap of what we've done Monday, Tuesday, so that we're all moving at the same page. Basically, we're talking sustainability. And when you hear sustainability, when you hear green, you should immediately, for simplification purposes, just think ESG, environmental friendliness or doing no harm to the environment, social inclusion and corporate governance. Or in other cases, it's people, planet, profits. I think you've all heard of that acronym as well, but they're all one and the same thing. And it's just generally smart business to be looking out for the environment, ensuring that as many people as can be included in your business model are included, and that your entity is run well, your corporate body is run well with external and internal frameworks. The major internal framework that we dealt with on Tuesday was boards, which we covered in somewhat of detail. And this morning, I'm going to then take us through, we had just one aspect of boards to close, which was how to run a good board meeting, what a good agenda looks like. And then we get into environmental friendliness and social inclusion and why it is good business. So quickly, a typical board agenda, which would have been circulated a couple of days prior to the meeting, also 7 working days to the meeting, if not earlier, but it's usually 7 working days because when papers are being uploaded or sent to the board members, they're usually looking at the agenda so that they follow quickly with what papers they're receiving, which, as I told you, should be received 7 working days ahead of the meeting. So in Uganda is where we tend to have an opening prayer. I just need to also emphasize that that is a very Uganda or African or regional centric thing, but where you sometimes have people from other continents, especially Europe and America, and they're in charge of the agenda, you are not going to find opening prayer on the agenda. Sometimes they may accommodate it, sometimes they won't. So it is up to you to then say your prayers. Whenever you do, that shouldn't take more than 2 minutes. There's review and adoption of the agenda. So even though the agenda has been received 7 days prior, something may have popped up, something, and it has to be extraordinary. If it needs to be included, usually it could be an update, say there's been a bomb has gone off, or there's something to do with the Ebola outbreak that somebody feels is pressing and burning that needs to be included. Other times you have members, board members, who are not going to last the entire duration of the meeting. Sometimes they have a duration, other engagements or an emergency and can only say give you 2 hours. What a typical board chairperson would do is then rearrange the agenda items so that you bring the most important and substantive agenda items, board agenda items up, and then you move the ones that say are for information or don't require everybody's participation to be down. In that case, the ones that usually get moved down would be, say, review of previous minutes and matters arising, because at that point, the board chairperson and board members, one, you have read you've read the previous meeting's minutes and the matters arising. And in case there's nothing urgent or burning, you can have those come last. And then you deal with, say, requests from management that would have typically been after that. So after review and adoption of the agenda, the chairperson makes remarks, welcoming everybody, contextualizes the meeting, talks about the quarter, what they expect, sometimes goes through rules of conduct, housekeeping, decorum, as one applies themselves. Then there's always a declaration of conflict of interest. There are now requirements that you send in your conflict of interest or declarations to declare whether you have a conflict of interest or not. You send that through prior to the meeting. Usually the company secretary or board secretary confirms whether or not he or she has received the declarations. And if there are none, or if there are any, those are dealt with. Again, that shouldn't take more than 2 to 3 minutes. The chairperson's remarks shouldn't take more than 5 to 7 minutes. review and adoption of agenda that I spoke about earlier should be about 2 to 3 minutes, max 5 minutes. Then, as I mentioned earlier this week, there's now a values and people moment. Values, what values from your organization? You know, you could say, like in our case, we have integrity, professionalism, innovation, and participation. So how have you guys applied them? What has stood out for you? That's usually by the CEO or any member of management that the CEO nominates to talk about how those values have come alive truly. Otherwise, as I said, they remain plastered on your walls and people are not consciously thinking about them. It's interesting when you start to prepare for these meetings, it then becomes inculcated in you how you are truly living out your values. People moments, that has come up, it's been people and safety has come very critical, especially from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we have Ebola, but oil and gas and entities that have especially manufacturing and big machinery and equipment or people who are living in hard to reach areas, working in hard to reach areas or war zones and that type of thing. You must do head counts, report on people, you know, just where there are critical occurrences that could occur from time to time. So that's now been included. Again, doesn't take more than 5 minutes. Then, as I said, if there's no pressing matter that needs to come ahead of reviewing previous minutes and matters arising, those could take about 15 minutes. Previous meetings minute, review of previous meetings minutes could take about 5 to 10 minutes. Remember, you have received those 7 days before. So if there are any typos or anything that wasn't recorded accurately, at that point you raise it quite quickly. And review of matters arising and actions that were taken takes slightly longer, could take between 20 and 25 minutes. But also if management populates the matters arising and explains what has been done and tries and answers, makes the updates in a way that is very clear to the reader, you find that you'll claw back quite a bit of time. Then the first report that comes out from the committee meetings is audit, risk and compliance. That one always takes precedent. And that committee also meets quarterly. And it is if shareholders want to participate in a meeting, it is the one that they tend to want to sit in, because that is where the crux of the matter is, sometimes with regards to audit, risk and compliance issues. So sometimes you see the shareholder sitting in that committee because they want to know if anything is burning, they want to know quickly at that point. And then the next reports that come in would be from the human resources or people. Now it's now being called people committee or people's committee. And then there's procurement and investment comes next. So those each take about 20 minutes because the committee sometimes is summarizing what has happened from their committee over the last quarter. At times they will ask management to step out of the room because there could be confidential issues that they want to speak out. They might want to talk about, now the committee members might want to talk about the weaknesses of the CEO and their team. And sometimes it's difficult to say those things in the presence of the people in the room. You know, they want to be extremely candid. So at that time, in certain instances, management is asked to step out of the room. And when everything is tame and not required, they will stay in the room. Then management comes in, led by the CEO, who makes their report. And the CEO is at liberty to call anybody from management to support them in delivering their report. Many a times, you'll have a head of business and head of finance coming to support the CEO, or the CEO can deliver every aspect of that report. Then if there are any other papers from management that need to be considered, resolutions, asks of any kind that were not dealt with in a committee, but need to be adopted or reviewed by the entire board, that also comes in, and those ones typically take between 10 to 15 minutes, as is the CEO's or management report. Then at that point, management can be excused, their goodbyes are exchanged at that point, because now the non-executive directors, so CEO and management team, leave, you're leaving the non-executive directors to speak amongst themselves. Sometimes they're just doing a review of the meeting's proceedings and want to take a restock or recap before they exit. Then there's closing remarks and end of meeting. If the non-executive directors do not need private time, then management stays through to the end. Closing remarks and also communicating the date of the next meeting and then ending the meeting. So that is what a typical agenda looks like. Then I'll go quickly straight into the two strands that I promised, being environmentally friendly and doing no significant harm to the environment, and social inclusion, and why that is smart business. So basically, one, sustainability is about meeting our needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So naturally, the environment comes into place. What type of inheritance, what type of earth are we leaving for our children's children? We're all about leaving them a good inheritance. And it's not just about money, it's about the kind of world and planet that we will leave them. So we need to manage our carbon footprint and the emission of greenhouse gases into the environment, which is causing many of the calamities that we're seeing, like, the rising temperatures and heat waves that we're seeing. The Great Barrier Reef is being eroded or killed off due to rising temperatures. Most importantly, for us in sub-Saharan Africa, where we're the lowest emitters of greenhouse gases, and that should tell you that our rate of industrialization, on the other hand, is not as heavy as, say, in the West or in the East. And so our contribution to greenhouse gases is at its lowest on the continent, but the vulnerabilities that come out of climate change are felt the most in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly with Uganda, where the most vulnerable to climate change. And again, at the same time, when a global ranking was done, we are the 49th least prepared to address the effects of climate change. So what effects am I talking about? I'm talking about prolonged rains, prolonged droughts, rising temperatures, under which pests and diseases thrive. There's and that entire vulnerability has cost us between 2 to 4% of GDP growth per country, per continent. Per country on this continent. And it's responsible for about that type of erosion. And if not much is done, that erosion of our GDP growth will continue to rise between now and 2050. And in monetary terms, that's an erosion of about 3 to 6 billion in annual damage that is done if nothing is done. So it's important really that we are equipped and are first of all playing our part in ensuring that no harm is done. We're recycling our garbage. We are not cutting down all our trees. And we are, for instance, not in my particular sector, which is agribusiness, we're not using synthetic or artificial fertilizers that are making the soils toxic. More what is required are organic fertilizers, for instance, that ensure that biodiversity, life above the earth and under or in our soils are also kept alive, because we need those worms, we need the bacteria, we need them all working in congruence in a way that synthetic or artificial fertilizer, for instance, doesn't support. So you'll find that is why there's a lot of focus on organic. Of course, as you know, synthetics and artificial anything lately is linked to cancer. For instance, particularly with ABI, again, I'll use our examples. Climate change affects agribusiness or agriculture. And why we think it's smart business, if there are rising temperatures or floods and everything, our partners, the banks who lend to agribusinesses and smallholder farmers, are bound to suffer losses when seed dries up in the ground, or when there are floods, or when cattle cattle die because there's a drought, there was no water harvesting done, there's no grass to eat. So it's important that interventions are made for the banks not to lose money in their portfolios and are able to pay, that the smallholder farmer or the agribusiness is able to pay back the bank is also able to pay us back. So the cycle generally continues. If we do nothing about it, One, the banks are just generally going to turn off the taps towards agriculture, and they're going to say it's too expensive, too risky. They'd rather, for instance, help people buy land to build their houses, get into real estate, and left to their own allocations, they'd rather also get into risk-free paper like treasury bills and bonds. And if they're going to lend, they'd want to lend salaried people for their personal consumption. You want to redecorate your house, improve your house, or buy a piece of land. That for them is a lot less riskier as opposed to lending to agriculture, where indeed the farmer truly can, and you're all seeing it, the drought is out there, they're not able to pay. They have a chibanja, which you can't dispose of. Even if you disposed of it, you'd fetch very little money. So why go through the bother? So, but we're an agrarian economy and we need to continue eating. And these smallholder farmers, even the large scale, but the smallholder farmers are the reasons we still have food to eat. And part of the inflation, by the way, that we are experiencing is due to a rise in food prices. So if we don't do something about these issues, we are all at a loss. So improved seed then, excuse me, becomes an issue, or becomes a matter of fact that needs to be taken, or a matter of course that needs to be taken. So for instance, dealing with a drought, you want early maturing seed, or seed that can withstand high temperatures and still sprout, or flood resistant, where the rains stay longer than they are supposed to. You find there's need to have seed that will not rot. Again, there are controversies around that, because there's some schools of thought that would rather have us not tamper at all with seed, to tinker around to make it that much more improved. But the reality is that we've got to do some tinkering, we've got to do some adjustments, otherwise we all won't eat. But a critical thing about improved seed is that it should be able to be replicatable. Like what seed is always like, from your harvest, keep some seed and therefore plant for the next season. I think controversies have been around seed that cannot sprout after the first generation. That way it keeps the smallholder farmer, it keeps the farmer, it keeps them slaves to the breeders of those seeds, and that is not encouraged. However, there's need to recycle that type of seed after, say, about 2-3 generations. Go get a fresh batch type thing. So it makes sense why we would ensure that farmers are thriving from the effects, or are mitigated against the effects of climate change. Because then the portfolios, the agribusiness portfolios within the banks remain healthy. They'll continue lending to agriculture, and the cycle remains, and ABI remains in business. We all remain employed while feeding the entire world, or the entire country, or supporting farmers to feed the entire country. Social inclusion. Why must you get as many people onto the table, or financially included, women, youth? Because again, it is smart business. You just want to ensure that more people are included in financially generating activities, or economic generating activities, because they then form your market. One country that I know spent quite a bit of time doing this was China. As much as they are the world's industry, or the world's manufacturer, and they focus externally and do quite a bit of export, they needed to reduce their dependency on export markets by ensuring that their domestic market was also vibrant. So likewise, it is smart business to ensure that women, who tend to be typically excluded financially because they don't tend to own assets, like land and money anyway, as well as youth, found ways of bringing them into the financial inclusion critical. For instance, at ABI, we support banks through a guarantee scheme to ensure that youth who otherwise have good ideas, or women who otherwise have good ideas, are supported with financing when they have absences of collateral. Again, smallholder farmers, it's usually focused on smallholder farmers. You would have seen me a couple of months ago, or a month ago, in partnership with Uganda Bankers Association, supporting regional export facilities with collateral, where now that one targets medium and small and growing into medium enterprises that want to get into regional export trade, but don't have sufficient collateral. All your capital, all your capex, your capital assets are mortgaged. You're mortgaged to the teeth, but you have a good prospect in Congo, but you lack the collateral that you need. ABI, and you're in agribusiness, ABI works directly with the SME. Of course, we do our own due diligence on the SME. Now, that's where corporate governance comes in, because we'll come to assess that corporate governance is alive and well, your systems and procedures are alive and well in your business before we can take a risk and to your face tell you that we will stand in with between 50 to 70% of any outstanding debt should you default. So it takes, we don't just do it on a leap of faith, we do it with thorough due diligence. And so that's how come we were supporting that intervention. So our intervention in that respect was to allow them access huge facilities, anything north of $1 billion, because we want to have heavy hitters going out into the region. So anything between 1 to 8 billion, I believe, we can support in terms of collateral support, as long as it is agribusiness and focused regionally. But as I said, we take you through thorough due diligence. So that is one way we're ensuring that agribusinesses or different actors are socially included. And so in your business, what are you doing? You recall the gentleman who came onto Business Garage, Trinity, and what he's doing with young people and ensuring that, one, they're part of his workforce, and so he's able to take on orders from across the world using a young workforce of youth who need to get their foot in the doorway of employment. They have the opportunity. It's smart business for him. They're earning while he takes on work from literally across the world. So it's smart business to ensure that as many people as can be financially included and getting into your market space are getting in. The one thing to be aware about these days, diversity, equity, and inclusion also, especially in the West, or entities that are inclined or partnering with entities from the West, or tend to come with elements of LGBTQ. So you must check that against your values, if it is something you're comfortable with or not. And then there's also, but what is commonly done here is indeed women, youth, people with disabilities. For us, we're now looking at refugees and the host communities. Again, it's smart business, because refugees, the one activity they get into is agribusiness. So it is important that we are addressing refugees and their host communities, and you can't isolate refugees from their host communities, because if you exclude the host communities, then there'll be hostility. So when we are thinking of interventions to ensure that refugees are financially included and are getting on with agribusiness, which contributes to the food systems and food security of this nation and country, we come up with interventions that cover both. But we must think about how to reach them, what type of systems reach them, because they're mobile. You might not be able to find them in one place. So banks are usually wary of reaching them. And so you come up with methods of tracking them, of dealing with them, their alien cards, how those unique identifiers are then built into a banking system to ensure that all is well captured and that they are traceable wherever they may go to a great extent. So that really is the two strands: environmentally friendly or doing no significant harm to the environment, as well as social inclusion. I hope those examples help drive the point home. And I'd like to leave a few minutes for questions and comments, but we have a lot more time tomorrow at the grill to discuss these matters in detail. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chairman.
Thank you so much, Shepherd Mona, for speaking to us. I'd like to open it up for any questions or comments. Just raise up your hand and then you hit your comment, because you have almost 1 minute to the close of the session. But I have a question, especially in the environment. Understanding that it's very important, and also citing that, especially in the emissions, the carbon emissions, Uganda contributes about 0.13% versus the US that contributes about 28%, and the China 27% of the global emissions. why do I think, I may be wrong, but why do I think it's an obstruction for Ugandans or even Africans to industrialize by saying that, Uganda is the most prone? Of course, they're the ones who fund research, they're the ones who do research. So I'd like to pick on your mind, why do I think it is them pushing the agenda so that we do not industrialize, citing the carbon emissions, yet we are least contributors, and yet we also need to industrialize? So what would be your take on that? Maybe the rest of the questions I reserve them for tomorrow's discussion. Thank you.
You're right on the money, and that has been Uganda's argument. And that is why we're continuing with ECO. Our contribution to the emissions is quite low. And as you know, with the Russian-Ukrainian war and with winter coming on, for instance, America has just turned on its taps again into natural gas. So that's indeed the hypocrisy that we're dealing with. And we need to go ahead and exploit. So you're right on the money. Of course, there'll be environmentalists who will protest. But as you can see, government and its partners, CNOC and Total, are going right ahead to make these investments, because indeed it has been argued that there's global or there's geopolitical hypocrisy keeping us back. So yes, if you have that school of thought, by all means, and which the government is, they're going right ahead. And the other issue to mitigate, indeed, while our emissions are low, there are going to be consequences of mining that gas. And so what the government and its partners are doing are saying, this is what we're doing to mitigate. We're even trying to mitigate against the Dutch disease, for instance. We can't have everybody dumping what they're doing and going into oil and gas, but we can have more development of other sectors around servicing the oil and gas sector. And Pastor Chris has been on this call and has been in every forum that he can, trying to talk about how we can exploit or serve, be a service to the add-ons or be part of the add-ons services to the oil and gas sector. So yeah, we're moving full steam ahead.
Wow. Thank you so much, Shepherd Mona. I see it's 31:07. We thank you. May the Lord cover us, protect us, bless the works of our hands. God there and shall luck, bless communities, the country and the world. See you tomorrow at the grill. We expect big numbers and all the questions, let them come through. Thank you so much, I appreciate. And I think we close the session. Have a blessed day. Thank you so much for blessing us this morning.